Gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr.
for
Chairman.
cutting people off, but we're going to have some votes, and I'm trying to get as many people in
Thank
as
you,
we
sir.
can.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarez, for being here in your testimony. So what I've actually learned here today is, as we focus on this legislation in general, we can sort of break it down into two parts: the monetary policy issues that the Fed does, and sort of like everything else. And in the everything else area, it sounds as though, from the question I've heard so far, is that you have worked with the administration, the Bush administration, and this administration on some of those programs, and you've appreciated the working together on that. And with some of the other policies, what have you, it seems as though the Fed has, I'll say the word, responded to some of the suggestions or what have you in these other areas to try to change the ways. For example, all the information on the websites and the audits and stuff like that's out there. And that, as far as I'm hearing, is an okay thing. And so the other, Chairman Franks, of course, that's what pressure, if you will, encouragement to the Fed with regard to credit lending practices and that sort of thing, and other people have as well. And the Fed, you might say, has responded, and the Fed has been active now in those areas as well, coming up with new guidelines on credit cards and that sort of thing. So in that area, it looks as though that the Fed is a little bit open to the idea of hearing what Congress has to say and respond. So, but it's in the monetary policy area that this legislation is most concerning or troublesome, if it's the right word, to the Fed. Okay. So one aspect of it is the disclosure requirements. What happens if the information is released too soon, what have you, and you have your guidelines as to when currently released. But as I just read it, I reread it just as I sit here, the audit doesn't really say that if you have a meeting on Monday and they do the audit on Tuesday, and of course it's going to take longer than that they're going to release all that information. It sounds like the audit is going to be one of these things that's going to take forever to do and finally release it. So it's not like you're going to have that immediate release of information that you're concerned from, at least from this audit. Is that correct?
So GAO is very responsive to the requests of Congress when Congress asks for audits in a specific period of time. My experience has been GAO tries its best to be responsive. So the time frames would be depend on what the audit is and what the request.
Right. But in other words, your concern is that you have a meeting on Monday and the information right now you release your minutes and what have you in 2 or 3 weeks. So unless the audit's done in less period of time, and would that be a provision that you would like to say, that if we change the language to say that it has to be a few weeks after?
So it's not just about the timing. It's about.
But on that one point, would that solve that?
I don't think so, because the timing of the release of the audit, let's think of it this way. There's two parts to it. The audit itself would involve an intrusion into the process of making monetary policy by the GAO's involvement with the various members and looking at the discussions and then second-guessing those discussions in its report. Its report, whenever it comes out, is going to be a judgment about whether the Fed is doing the right thing, moving in the right direction on monetary policy, whether its basis for that is appropriate.
But doesn't Congress already have the authority with all the reports and everything else, and the chairman comes to testify us a couple times a year? We have that authority right now to, if you will, second guess what the Fed is doing. Don't we have that authority and the responsibility to second guess Congress, second guess the Fed at this point?
So I think what is different is the GAO establishes a much more intrusive review and process. As I mentioned, it will talk to all of the participants. It will look at all of the underlying data and make a more comprehensive evaluation.
So what you're saying,
it's not simply a statement at the end, and so that review gives it a different aura.
Yeah,
it gives its reports a different kind of weight.
But what that is basically saying is we can second guess and give you our opinion just as long as we don't know what all the facts are. But if somebody else actually goes in and talks to the people and find out what the facts are, then that report would have more weight because they were actually there. It sounds as though that when we second guess you, we're basing it on inadequate information, and when the GAO does their inquiry, they're doing with it. Last question, I only have 30 seconds, and that is this: if the governors are as independent as they hold themselves out to be, why would they be so subjected then to this pressure from someone second guessing them and saying that we think you should have done X when they did Y? Are they like what Secretary Geithner says as far as all the other regulators? He says all the other regulators, banking regulators, I know you're not a regulator per se, but all the other banking regulators are only looking out for their own turf and their own self-interest. And he doesn't hold regulators up very high. Is that the case with the federal governors, or are they truly people who are independent and would not be subjected to the pressures of a audit, whatever the audit says? Which camp do they fall into?
So they do their best right now in the atmospheres that they're given. They're given an atmosphere where unfettered discussion is allowed and is actually valued. They've become much more worried about how their remarks would be viewed, what their thoughts would be, and become much more careful about what they say. And that changes the debate, that changes the discussion, lowers the level of interaction, and that's what we're concerned
I understand what you're saying.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Foster.
Thank you. I had just one question having to do with historical archiving of information. I can understand your motivation not to want deliberations, discussions with foreign regulators, this sort of thing, to become immediately part of the public debate and so on. That I understand that line of reasoning. However, I think there's a real incentive and a good policy objective in having the eyes of history on the decisions that are being made. And so, for example, do you have policies on archiving correspondence, memos, email, and a policy on the dates at which different classes of information get released?
We do, sir. So the decision is announced immediately after the meeting. Detailed minutes are made publicly available.
Now, I wasn't referring to just the official meetings where decisions take place. I'm talking about email between two people that are kicking back and forth saying, I just met with this European guy. He said that we're going to terminate this program then. It would be really good if we coordinated. That sort of.
We do. We
Right.
have policies for all of the documentation, including emails that we keep for the length of time that we have a schedule that's in accord with the archivist about keeping that information. Also, in the monetary policy area, we keep all the memoranda that are used for the FOMC meetings and a complete transcript of the meeting. We make those available to the public after 5 years. And we keep them permanently ourselves.
Okay, but for example, all of the detailed stuff, emails, internal memos, person-to-person correspondences, will those be available to historians, 10, 20, 30 years from now? What is the policy there?
So the policy on disclosure of that information depends on the type of information. Some is made available as time passes. Some of it contains confidential information that's not made available even as time passes. So it depends on the type of information. But as I mentioned on FOMC matters directly, the full transcript and all the supporting memoranda for the decision. So that includes the complete discussion.
Right,
of all
I understand.
the members.
That's very
That's
well hashed out. It is
That's
the less formal.
Right.
Now, is any information deliberately destroyed, or is it simply kept but not released?
The only information that's destroyed is information that the archivist, the National Archivist, has agreed can be destroyed, and that's usually information that has no historical value, and that's destroyed according to a set schedule. And that's to allow capacity for new information.
All right. Would it be possible for you to point us at the policies that the archivist follows, just rough, in some appropriate level of detail, so we can see the classes of stuff that is preserved and destroyed and the sort of general guidelines that are being followed?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yield back.
The gentleman from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Alvarez, for being here. I wonder if you could give us an update on the status of the Fed's appeal of the ruling in the Bloomberg Freedom of Information request lawsuit requiring the Fed to disclose the identity of the firms that access the discount window?
Yes, as you're aware, Congressman, there are two cases. There's the Bloomberg case and the Fox News case, both decided by district judges in the Second Circuit about 3 weeks apart on identical issues, one saying that the information should be released, one saying information should not be released. Both cases are in the process of being appealed to the Second Circuit. The appeals are due in the next few weeks, and I expect them to be both fully appealed.